At first, it sounded like just another rumor, the kind that circulates every time a beloved series nears its end. But this one refused to fade. Because somehow, the idea that Heughan and Caitríona Balfe could return in an Outlander spin-off didn't feel impossible, it felt unfinished. And that's exactly what made fans stop and ask the question no one could fully answer: how? On the surface, the situation seems clear. The original story is reaching its conclusion, and with it, the journeys of the characters that defined it. Their arcs have been built carefully over time, leading toward a sense of closure that feels both earned and inevitable. In most cases, that would mark the end, a clean break between what was and whatever comes next. But something about this doesn't feel like a clean ending. Because even as the story approaches its final chapter, the world around it doesn't disappear. The timeline, the history, the relationships, they continue to exist beyond what's shown on screen. And that's where the possibility begins to take shape. Not as a continuation of the same narrative, but as an extension of the world that made it possible. A shift in perspective rather than a direct continuation. Fans quickly began to explore the possibilities. Some suggested flashbacks, moments set in the past that could revisit key emotional beats without disrupting the ending. Others imagined alternate timelines, parallel stories, or even unseen chapters that were never fully explored. And then there were the more subtle theories, the ones that didn't rely on major plot devices, but instead focused on how presence can be felt without being central. Because returning doesn't always mean leading. It doesn't always mean continuing the same story in the same way. Sometimes, it means appearing in fragments, in memories, in echoes, in moments that connect the past to the present without fully bringing it back. And in a story built on time, history, and emotional continuity, that kind of return might not just be possible, it might be inevitable. What makes this even more intriguing is the way both actors have spoken about the series in recent conversations. There's a sense of closure, yes, but also a kind of openness. Not a confirmation of anything specific, but a tone that doesn't completely shut the door. And for fans who have followed every detail, every interview, every subtle shift in wording, that openness feels significant. At the same time, there's a practical reality to consider. Spin-offs exist to expand, not to repeat. They introduce new characters, new storylines, new perspectives. Bringing back familiar faces too prominently could risk overshadowing what the new narrative is trying to build. Which means that if a return does happen, it likely won't be in the way people expect. And that's where the tension lies. Because the desire to see them again is strong, not just because of the characters, but because of what they represent. Years of storytelling, emotional investment, and a connection that feels larger than the show itself. But fulfilling that desire without undoing the impact of the original ending requires a different kind of approach. That's why the question, how, matters more than if. It shifts the focus away from confirmation and toward possibility. It invites speculation, but also restraint. Because whatever form a return might take, it has to exist within the boundaries of a story that has already said what it needed to say. And yet, the idea continues to grow. Not because it's been confirmed, but because it feels like something that could happen, just not in the way anyone is expecting. A presence without dominance. A connection without continuation. A return that doesn't restart the story, but quietly reminds you that it never truly ended. Which leads to a deeper question. What if the return isn't about bringing them back, but about showing that they were never completely gone in the first place? As the idea began to settle, the conversation shifted from excitement to something more analytical. Because if Heughan and Caitríona Balfe were to return, even briefly, it wouldn't just be a creative decision, it would be a narrative one. And narrative decisions, especially in a world as layered as Outlander, are rarely accidental. They're designed to serve a purpose, not just satisfy expectations. That's why the most compelling theories aren't the obvious ones. A full continuation of their story would risk undoing the emotional weight of the ending. It would reopen arcs that were meant to close, potentially weakening the impact of everything that came before. Instead, the more likely possibilities exist in the margins, in the spaces where the past intersects with the present without overwhelming it. One of those possibilities lies in perspective. A spin-off doesn't have to retell the same story, it can reframe it. New characters could encounter fragments of their legacy, references that don't require direct involvement but still carry their presence. And in moments like that, a brief appearance, a memory, a recounting, even a symbolic echo, could bridge the gap between what was and what is. There's also the structural advantage of a story built around time. Time in this world isn't linear in the way most narratives are. It bends, overlaps, revisits itself. That creates opportunities for appearances that don't feel forced, because they align with the rules already established. A return, in that sense, wouldn't need to be explained, it would simply need to fit. But what makes this even more interesting is the emotional layer behind it. Because for audiences, seeing them again isn't just about curiosity. It's about continuity. It's about holding on to something that has been part of their experience for years. And for the creators, balancing that emotional connection with the need to move forward is a delicate task. That's where restraint becomes important. A return that is too direct, too prolonged, risks shifting the focus away from the new story. But a return that is too subtle might feel unsatisfying. The challenge lies in finding a point where presence enhances the narrative without dominating it. And that kind of balance often results in something unexpected, not a full comeback, but a carefully placed moment that carries more weight than its duration suggests. What's also worth considering is how both actors have approached the idea of closure. Their reflections on the series suggest a willingness to move forward, but not a desire to disconnect entirely. That nuance matters. It leaves room for involvement without commitment, for presence without permanence. And in a spin-off environment, that kind of flexibility can be incredibly valuable. Still, nothing has been confirmed. No official announcement, no clear indication of how or when such a return might happen. And yet, the idea persists. Not because of evidence, but because of possibility. Because in a story that has always played with time, memory, and connection, the absence of confirmation doesn't eliminate the potential, it simply leaves it open. And maybe that's the real twist. Not that they will return in a way fans can predict, but that their presence might be felt in ways that don't require them to fully come back at all. A reminder that some characters don't need to reappear to remain part of the story. Because in the end, a true return isn't always about stepping back into the spotlight. Sometimes, it's about realizing you never really left. Still, nothing has been confirmed. No official announcement, no clear indication of how or when such a return might happen. And yet, the idea persists. Not because of evidence, but because of possibility. Because in a story that has always played with time, memory, and connection, the absence of confirmation doesn't eliminate the potential, it simply leaves it open. And maybe that's the real twist. Not that they will return in a way fans can predict, but that their presence might be felt in ways that don't require them to fully come back at all. A reminder that some characters don't need to reappear to remain part of the story. Because in the end, a true return isn't always about stepping back into the spotlight. Sometimes, it's about realizing you never really left. Still, nothing has been confirmed. No official announcement, no clear indication of how or when such a return might happen. And yet, the idea persists. Not because of evidence, but because of possibility. Because in a story that has always played with time, memory, and connection, the absence of confirmation doesn't eliminate the potential, it simply leaves it open. And maybe that's the real twist. Not that they will return in a way fans can predict, but that their presence might be felt in ways that don't require them to fully come back at all. A reminder that some characters don't need to reappear to remain part of the story.